Americans of Reddit, what do you think about the metric system? Is it better or worse? I like metric more. The problem is I don't relate to it at all. I don't have a sense where I know how a given measurement is metric feels. Had we grown up with it, it wouldn't be a problem. I wish the schools would switch over. Me? I'm keeping my imperial. It is what I know and my entire life is kept to scale by it. Like, I know a 5 feet 8 inches dude at 200 pounds is probably overweight. If you told me 80 centimeters guy weighed or 137 kilograms I would have no sense of scale. Is he tall and lean, short and fat? Is 30 Celsius hot? I don't know what it feels like. 95 F and humid I felt. 7 kilometers walk, is that far? I need it in miles to get it. 4 miles I get. Is 80 kph fast driving? 70 miles per hour is a great highway speed. 200 Celsius oven, is that the temp for chicken nuggets? 400 F for my tendies. It isn't that the metric system is better. It is the amount of time and money that would be required to redo so much of the infrastructure if we converted. The biggest issue I'm personally connected with is all of the national surveys. The way all of our land is in plots, townships etc. can't simply be converted. It quite literally would have to be resurveyed. People fight over inches of land and fence lines, and getting everything redone correctly is a limiting factor. Most people think about only switching learning in school or a sign that says X miles till New York and putting it in kilometers, but the true underlying backbone of our imperial system is in all of the land measurements that were done. There are some genuine advantages with imperial and ratios, specifically to do with things being able to break into clean thirds, fourths, sixths, and halved with very little mental math. Metric seems much more sensible for a lot of things, but I do have to stand by that one part of the imperial system. I think inches and feet and yards are probably the best part of ours. And at this point all of the road infrastructure built on that system, so I think it makes sense to keep it, and therefore systems based on those. For weight, grams seem way more sensible than our silly archaic system. It's not even really close. Grams are precise enough for any practical usage, and kilograms are still a precise enough unit. I don't really care about Fahrenheit and Celsius. It's kinda really arbitrary. For me those are really the only 3 things that I even consider. I don't know if there are other units in question for specific fields, but from what I remember things like joules and amps and such are already metric units. It's just different. Honestly, I use both. You have to, because a lot of materials come from metric countries. I despise converting between them, but it's not that hard. Construction with wood is easy in imperial once you get the hang of it. Easier than metric in my experience, because fractions are easier to add together in your head than decimals. Where it really drives me insane is manufacturing. All electronics are metric, all of them, but a typical CNC machine uses mil. What's a mil, you ask? It's 1/1000th of an inch. How does that convert to metric? Seriously, it's insane. So, if you are milling a part using mil to fit some electronics, then the math is stupid and confusing because they're called the same thing, and at that level, you are dealing with components with such accuracy that being a few mil off fucking matters. I use the metric system at work. The numbers are smaller in inches, but we can use whole numbers in millimeters. I'm more familiar with gallons/quarts/pints/cups/fluid ounces than milliliters. As a draftsman, I find that the units being consistent is more valuable to me than the units being easily convertible. Whatever discipline you're working in, you're always going to get a drawing from some asshole who doesn't use the same basic measurement that you do, and now you have to convert it. I draw in millimeters. Architects and civil engineers, in America, draw in feet. We have gotten drawings from New Zealand that were drawn in millimeters, then scaled to inches to send to us. which we then scale to millimeters so that we could use it. I just want to be able to measure a drawing and not have to convert the result before I can use it. I don't care if I have to draw in millimeters, feet or inches. I'll draw in cubits or handbreadths. If you give me a good conversion ratio, I just want everything to be the same. It's equivalent for 99% of purposes. Saying somewhere is about 15 kilometers away isn't better than saying it is 10 miles away. Saying you are 5'10" isn't better than saying you are 180 centimeters. The only benefit metric really has is simple conversions, which is something that really doesn't come up in daily life with any complexity where it is useful. Converting 65 centimeters to 0.65 meters is certainly easy, but anyone with a basic education won't have trouble changing 43 inches to about 3.5 feet if you were explaining something or just using 43 inches if measuring something. I've yet to see an argument for metric as an objective improvement to imperial in a context that matters for the average person. Depends what you're measuring. Liquids, metric, hands down. Liters and milliliters are much easier than cups, pints, quarts, etc. The confusion in ounces of weight versus ounces of liquid volume further seals the deal. Distances get tricky. I feel like a foot is more of a right-sized unit, centimeters are too small for human-sized things, and meters are too big. No one uses decimeters. The height of a person is either hundreds of centimeters, a number hard to picture in your head, or a number of meters between 1 and 2. Too vague. With feet, you can tell it's a short person, 4 feet, an average person, 5 feet, or a tall person, 6+ feet, instantly. Unfortunately, feet are almost completely detached from miles, 5,280, and miles are too big to use in dense cities. We use blocks as an informal unit. Kilometers are better than miles but feet are better than meters. Celsius is better near freezing and is more common in industrial, scientific applications, but the units feel slightly too large for me. The distance from 40 to 41 can hardly be felt, but from 40 to 45 is a huge jump. With Fahrenheit, 1 degree isn't noticeable, but 5 seem like comfortable increments. I think it's a pain in the ass, but not for the typical reasons you'd think. Firstly, the automotive industry. To work on my car, I need 2 sets of sockets and wrenches, C and metric. You'd think everything would be the same, but it's not. Parts are often grouped together, so if your AC condenser uses 14mm bolts to bolt it to the engine, the supply lines are 12mm, but to get to that, I've got to remove the skid plate that uses 1/2, but on other parts, like a pin bolt, the head of the bolt is 16mm, but the nut is 1/2. The second reason the metric system sucks is that none of my C sockets go missing, but that damn 10mm socket can never be found. I've got regular sockets, impact sockets, and even deep well sockets, and the 10mm is missing from all of them. Yes, the sets did come with them, but somewhere between the store and the time I needed it, that damn 10mm gnome stole all my damn 10mm sockets. I even bought new ones, painted them hot pink, and tied them all together. Next time I needed one, gone, and that, friends, is why the metric system sucks balls. Fun fact about the imperial system: how is the width of a horse's butt related to the space shuttle? Well, in ancient Rome they used the average width of a horse butt, widest part of a horse, to design a standardized track width of chariots and carriages. The Romans needed standards to run their big empire. Everything is easier and manufacturing becomes cheaper. Therefore this measurement became popular in ancient Europe. You can imagine. Also the Romans built a lot of streets, based on dimension standards, all over Europe, which were used for centuries even after the fall of the Roman Empire. The later carriages driving on those streets and also much later the first trams were pulled by horses on streets still existing from the Roman standards. so the measurement still made sense. When the railway was invented and adopted, those measurements were kept to easily swap from horse to locomotive, mainly in Britain, who was the ruling power in the settlement of Northern America. Take a guess. So this was implemented in what later became the USA. The amount of this track width directly leads, because of physics, to the maximum width of a train, which again tells architects how wide tunnels for trains have to be. Larger tunnels than needed are way more expensive. Most parts of the space shuttle had to be transportable by railway, especially the fuselage, and it had to fit through the tunnels. The complete imperial system is still today based on ancient traditions, which I claim is outdated. Maybe that's what only the USA, Myanmar and Liberia are still using it. The rest of the world switched to the metric system. It's also a lot easier for all tasks, because it's completely based on tens. Those who refuse to switch to the metric system will get overtaken in the future based on globalization. Lots of civilizations went extinct based on their ability or will of adaptation. I hope nothing got lost in translation because English is my second language. I'm a design engineer, and I almost exclusively use the metric system at work. It's objectively better for anything involving calculations or unit conversions. That said, I think a big reason why the US hasn't formally switched is because the benefits of metric don't really have an impact on the day-to-day lives of most people. Miles, feet, pounds, and degrees Fahrenheit are intuitive in magnitude and have sufficient resolution for daily life. Rather than force everyone to formally switch and change everything, it's easier to just use metric where it's needed. The obvious exception is volume. English volume measurements suck and should be abolished immediately and forever. American architect, fabricator and design teacher. I live by this quote: in metric, 1 milliliter of water occupies 1 cubic centimeter, weighs 1 gram, and requires 1 calorie of energy to heat up by 1 degree centigrade, which is 1% of the difference between its freezing point and its boiling point. An amount of hydrogen weighing the same amount has exactly 1 mole of atoms in it, whereas in the American system, the answer to how much energy does it take to boil a room temperature gallon of water is go fuck yourself, because you can't directly relate any of those quantities. Also, in the 1950s the US standardized out units based upon, get this, the metric C standard. We are just used to our standard units, but I use both professionally and teach both. Overall, metric is a better system. Standardized is just kind of definitionally better. The only metric scale I don't care for is centigrade. While I appreciate the logic of setting 0 at freezing and 100 at boiling, it is less useful for weather. 0 Fahrenheit is very cold and 100 is very hot, but basically 0 to 100 Fahrenheit is the range a human can survive in without serious equipment. It also allows for greater nuance in weather since the gradations are smaller. Centigrade, by contrast, is a scale where 0 is brisk but you can handle colder and 100 is dead for the average human without serious equipment, and needing to add decimals to make it worthwhile for weather is irritating. I completely understand why cooks, bakers would prefer centigrade, and I get why scientists prefer centigrade, or Kelvin, but for the typical person and especially as concerns weather, Fahrenheit is a more useful scale. I have a degree and experience in construction engineering, but now my career is software engineering. I'm familiar with various number systems and bases. Metric is, by and large, significantly better for the science world. The fact that it's a Base 10 system is less important than the fact that the metric system was designed to be used in science. The imperial system was largely based upon our observed world and relative to body parts, arbitrary frames of reference. The conversions suck because of this. However, I believe many units feel better in certain usage. Fahrenheit is one of them. A couple degrees Fahrenheit can easily be felt. but may only be 1.1 degrees Celsius. Using whole numbers is just easier to understand, specific to construction, and having bid jobs both in imperial and metric. Feet are way more reasonable to work with than meters or centimeters, or millimeters, and feel far more proportional to the human body. A 1.828 meters tall person is going to walk through a 2.1336 meters door with an 2.438 meters ceiling. As a physics teacher with a background in mechanical engineering, I strongly feel that metric is better for nearly all purposes, although Fahrenheit is arguably better for casual uses as it's very convenient to say in the 80s without it being too large of a range. That said, I find it hard to imagine the US switching at this point. It's not just America's maverick attitude, it's that we have a huge prevalence of imperial machinery, equipment, and machining implements in factories and such. A switchover would involve a huge period of time with much more confusion over, for example, threading on nuts and bolts, with industry required to make old nuts to repair old things, as well as to make new nuts for new things. It would have been a lot easier to switch over earlier on in the industrialization process. Of course, it'll probably just get even harder over time, but the fact is we've made things work out without a huge number of issues. Please don't quote space missions at me. I'm aware that there are clearly exceptions. I'm British, not American, but I fucking love metric. I do everything in metric when working. However, for anything that I touch or is related to my body, I prefer to use imperial when I'm with friends or family. Why? It just seems more natural to use numbers between 1 and 10, roughly, for things that I am or that I touch. So I'm 10 stone and 5'8" and drink a pint at a time, and can jump a couple of feet high. My thumb is an inch long, and my feet are almost exactly a foot long. Strange that, but for anything I'm building or working with, it's metric all the way. Want me to build you a new table, 3 feet high? I'm doing all the measurements in metric. It's so easy to work with. Pounds I don't really get. Things are either stones informally, or kilos formally for me. Miles or km doesn't bother me, they're nearly the same. Temperature is an interesting one. 0–100 Celsius make perfect sense to me when cooking, but when I'm ill, I can never remember what body temperature should be. Isn't have to look it up. Having 100 be body temperature seems an excellent idea to me. Perhaps we should have a new scale with 0 at freezing and 100 as body temperature. As someone else said, imperial to estimate, metric to measure. It's a lot easier to guess what length something is in inches, to me at least, and I still think in miles per hour instead of kmph. So while I'm from Ireland and we mostly use metric now, I totally understand why in day-to-day life, people want to hold on to imperial, except for Fahrenheit. That shit makes absolutely no sense. 0°F is based of the freezing point of brine. Like, how does that help anyone? How often are people trying to freeze brine? Whereas 0°C is when water freezes, which is very important for people to know in day-to-day life. And then 100°C is when water boils. And we all have experienced boiling water and can understand what that temperature is. Celsius is just irrefutably better. I've never heard any logical reason for anyone to still be using Fahrenheit, outside of I'm just used to it. Nothing about it makes sense. The metric system is used for business and scientific purposes all the time in the US. Imperial units are mostly used for everyday products and distances on highways. For business and scientific purposes, metric is ideal and imperial units are terrible. You need to subdivide all the time and it is just way more convenient to be able to quickly convert between orders of magnitude. For some things, it literally doesn't matter. It really is no more or less convenient to guy gas in gallons than liters, or to measure distances on highways in miles rather than kilometers. 99.9% of the time, for outdoors temperatures, Fahrenheit is honestly fine. 100°F is dangerously hot, 0°F is dangerously cold, and every 10°F is reasonably different. Metric has the advantage that freezing is 0°C instead of 32°, but most outdoors temperatures end up compressed in half the range, which makes them less distinct. Degrees centigrade is vastly superior for any sort of laboratory purposes, though, where 0°C and 100°C matter a lot more. For human height, metric heights can feel weird. People are less than 2 meters tall, but many are more than 6 feet tall. Most humans fall within a fairly narrow range of heights, and the imperial system helps to stretch that out by making it feel more significant. The difference between someone who is 5 feet tall and 6 feet tall seems like it does a better job of signifying the difference than 152 versus 182 centimeters. It's not a big deal though, and you can get used to it. The main areas where not being metric is annoying is when you need to measure stuff and break it down into subunits, for instance, converting between inches and feet, or pounds and ounces, or subdividing liquid units. People make mistakes with these all the time, and it is just annoying to deal with it in general. There are some advantages to the imperial units in cooking, though. Having measuring cups that are half, 3/4, 1/3 rd, oct. The size can be useful without them making for decimal places. Recipes are often ratios, so having a 6:3:2:1 ratio in the recipe is not the best in metric but works fine in imperial units.